Good morning and welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Lindsay T.H. Jackson. And today I thought we would start like this. Breonna Taylor. 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 And I could say that name again and again until I had no more breath in my body. Today we are talking about allyship in action. What does it mean to move past being an ally to being an accomplice? What does it mean to continue to sustain the work, the call to action, the call to self-interrogation, long past the time when your social media is dominated by the words hashtag Black Lives Matter? What does it mean to take the work and internalize it in ourselves, in our homes, in our workplaces, and in our larger society? I'm joined today by Gunnar Scott, Senior Communications and Engagement Planner at King County Metro, and also the owner of Make Waves Coaching and Consulting. Also on the virtual couch is Priya Frank, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at the SAM, the Seattle Art Museum, and Robin Force Counts, Head of Research at Salesforce and a longtime anti-racism researcher. Welcome, everyone. Robin, right now, as we continue to grapple with news that almost is so absurd that one might wonder, am I really awake? Am I really living through reality right now? What is it that you tend to see in your research as individuals grapple with this sustained awareness of institutionalized racism, institutionalized patriarchy, misogyny, homophobia? Is it normal that we might want to sort of draw away from the work at this point on the journey?
Yeah, we're seeing patterns of 6 stages of a journey with understanding our complicity in something. So we've been calling it the Journey of AntiRacism, but it really applies to any form of oppression that we're trying to understand our role in. And so what we see is at stage 3, people get to this personal acceptance, like, oh my gosh, wow, other people have been harmed, or I've been harmed, harm has occurred. And we see our role in it at personal acceptance. And then we want to take action, especially in the culture that we live in, where action is kind of the badge of honor. We want to take action before we do the self-inquiry and understand how our internalized oppression has impacted our worldview. And so we're out here trying to heal our own selves while we participate in trying to save other people. And that perpetuates white saviorism and performative action, virtual, insert all the words here. There's a bunch of bad things, harm that is done when we skip over that, like, wow, what is my role in being complicit in society, and what is the harm that's been done to me, and the harm that I've experienced, including workplace trauma and things we think are small. Like, those are buttons that get pushed. So then when we're out trying to accomplish or support groups that we haven't been raised in, or groups that we have, like when we're trying to support other people, we aren't a healthy we become we other. We want to help others. And really, normalizing diversity is for our collective freedom. It's for all of us. It's not so that I can feel better about myself because I did something to save someone else. And I digress pretty quick because I'm so passionate about this subject. So I'm a little nervous that I forgot the question.
No, I mean, I think I want to unpack a little bit of what you just said there, because that was a lot of big words that can seem a little daunting. So what is white saviorism?
In colonial cultures, in our dominant culture, which is based on white supremacy cultural norms, that there is a race that is supreme and it is better in all of that hierarchy and all of that. There is also this notion that the people at the top, we don't even name that, we don't even say it, but it's everywhere, will can help. I can help other people, I can save, and that's all about their ego. It's all about them feeling better. And you, if you haven't noticed it now, you will see it everywhere. Like, it's it's what I'm posting on Facebook so people think that I'm doing something. It's so that the person tells me I'm a good ally. It's all about getting approval for the savior. I spent quite a bit of time on the continent of Africa, and there's a lot of, it's very blatant there. This, like, I'm going to help them. I'm going to give money. I'm going to give myself, and look at me in this picture. And it doesn't help with our collective liberation. It helps the person to feel better, and it does harm then, because then they don't get the approval or whatever they're looking for. And now they're back to the second stage in their journey, which is, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with diversity. It's stage 2 of tolerating diversity. So anything that centers the person that's doing the work rather than the community of all of us trying to get free is perpetuating harm. Yeah. For the people who might be sitting on the couch going, this is really overwhelming, I'll just do nothing because it's kind of scary, how would we speak to them? And was that question for me? Priya and Gunnar, I realize you have things to say too. Okay. We can do harm by taking action that is motivated by our own selves. And not taking action, not doing anything to help our collective freedom is complicity. And I'm not here to shame anyone for being complicit. I have my own shame I got to work with every day. It is that action must be taken for us all. And so that's about educating ourselves and doing the personal inquiry work to look at what our role is in it and how we can take action in our community, in relationship, in reciprocal relationship with people with whom we respect. So not asking other people to do something to make us feel better or to, check a box, but to, actually, how are your people today? and how can we all contribute to liberation, starting with the folks who have been most marginalized by our systems. That means in relationship with the people you know, or in relationship with people that you know who have more instincts about where to put resources, we need action. I was looking back at the Indigenous networks, an article I read, I want to say 8 years ago, just about the journey, the different forms of allyship versus accomplice. And I don't get to call myself an ally or an accomplice. I get to take action that no one knows I'm taking because it's the right thing. And I think for folks wondering how to take action, read articles like that and figure it out in your community. Like, your cells have come together to make you and the relationships you have, and how can you help with that healing?
I want to just echo talking about really agreeing with what Robin was talking about and thinking about myself as how do I undo the white supremacist learning that is everywhere. It is so pervasive that when you think you've undone something, something else will come and fill it in, and it's an ongoing piece of work. And in thinking a lot about my work particularly around LGBTQ rights, but more centrally transgender issues over the last 25, 30 years, the story I talk a lot about is that in Massachusetts, we were the second state to have non-discrimination protections on sexual orientation, which happened in 1989. And on average, most states that did that didn't get transgender protections for another 17 years. And that was the case for Massachusetts. And when myself and my group of folks that started to work on that, we started with passing an ordinance in the city of Boston. There was only one city that had an ordinance protecting trans people, and that was Cambridge. And as we passed the ordinance and we were preparing to go statewide, marriage equality was bubbling up. And we were literally taken aside into a room by folks, mostly white gay men and white gay women, being told that we needed to sit down, be quiet, and wait for our turn. And I feel like that phrasing happens to marginalized communities all the time. Like, you just need to wait. And at that time for us, we had come off of the murder of Rita Hester, who is a Black trans woman, who was someone I knew, and it was 2 weeks after Matthew Shepard was killed. And the stark difference between how the community and even the mainstream community kind of were horrified by what happened to Matthew Shepard as a young white gay man, and then how Rita Hester was so disrespected. I mean, her name, her pronoun, how she lived her life, not just by the mainstream press, but by our own gay media. They were the biggest perpetrators, which then gave permission to the mainstream press to continue that. And that, happens to this day. And when we look at when I look at just the small community of trans people, most vulnerable are young Black trans women. And, the work that I've tried to contribute to is how do we create a world where young Black trans women can thrive? And it's that idea of like lifting all boats type of thing. So if we can fix what's happening for that community, that will improve for everyone. And it's not also for me to make the decision like this is how we do everything or anything like that. It's been my journey to learn how to do that in relationship to that community, and where it's where for me to step up and step back, and also how do I use the power and privilege I have to kind of kick those doors open and speak directly to my white peers. And I feel like that's my role, is more to speak to my white peers and try to hold them accountable, to bring education, and to continue to push back on that white supremacist culture that, like I said, the minute you undo something, something else fills it in. And, it is, and then when we came to looking at marriage, and thinking about the stories that were told and who was told, and this idea, it was really about mainstreaming. I mean, originally, some of our legislators were okay with women getting married. They were not okay with men getting married. Like, also, like, how all of this is like just is weaved so tightly together.
Yeah.
And what does it mean for communities of color? What is that institution? What does it actually mean? And for me, some of it at that time was about marriage gave access to resources that folks didn't have. And so some of my theory behind it was like, you don't have health insurance, your best friend does, get married. Like, we have been creating families all kinds of ways, whatever that means. And part of that is to keep ourselves safe and to have resources. And so how can we take the system that is trying to mainstream us and normalize us that way? That might have been my marriage proposal to my husband, who had better health insurance than I did.
Uh-oh, Gunnar, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to ask him. So tell me how that marriage proposal went. So, Gunnar, I hear you saying that it was a long, sustained, committed journey. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't one march. It wasn't two marches. It wasn't a little bit of canvassing. It wasn't a sign in my front yard. Can you tell us what does that feel like to have to stay in it every day?
For me, it's my estranged mother likes to say, I came out of the womb kicking and screaming, and I'm not like most of my family. I grew up in America's hometown, the original colonizer of Plymouth, Massachusetts. The story told about Thanksgiving is so fake. And like when I was a young adult, I went to my first day of mourning and just was shocked and angry about being told all these lies. And like that rock, the Plymouth Rock, was a rock in the middle of town in the 50s that was taken. They wanted to create a new road, so they dragged it down to the waterfront and built a big thing around it and called it Plymouth Rock. And, I didn't learn that story until I went to the day of mourning. And what really, so that for me is was like, I think of that as my like touch point or my spark, was that how much there is such a narrative that is to uphold something that's not real and is built on the backs of people who had very little choice, and many times. I do a lot of study around the Holocaust, and I'm actually reading this book right now called The 999 Girls, and it's about the first transport of women to Auschwitz. And this is the first author I've read who talks about the comparisons to the conditions that these girls went through to slave ships and that psychological breakdown of humanity. And so it is understanding how fascism and white supremacy works in that way is, for me, a way to continue to undo that and to understand and to look at our world and see, particularly right now with the administration we have and around, the immigration detention centers and how those are so similar to some of those same structures that brought slave ships to the U.S. or put folks into concentration camps. And so that is, what it is a drive that I have, and I want to be loving, kind, and open and compassionate to my white peers who have not had that spark or that opportunity as well. And it's wrapped up in guilt and shame and all the things. And I think part of this is how do we help to break those things apart? And I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend that I do too. I know that it is, even this Black girl right here wants to name all of the ways that I have cycled through my own shame of growing up in homophobic culture, transphobic culture, ableist culture, classist culture, and having to confront that. It's like mirror, mirror on the wall. Hello, ego. You got to deal with that stuff. And it's a journey. It's definitely a journey. Priya, in speaking about this journey, I think it's interesting for those business leaders, that we call our desiring to be conscious business leaders on the call, because, when we think about the Seattle Art Museum, it seems like they had a bit of a mirror on the wall moment, waking up and going, hey, museum's so colonialist. Like, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I think at SAM, this work has been happening actually for quite a long time, well before I was there. I got there 5 years ago. And yeah, it has been a journey, and that's always how it is, and this isn't work that has just suddenly come about. I think what's exciting is that with the momentum, I have a lot of hope around what's possible and bringing everybody along internally. I came to SAM, like I said, almost 5 years ago, and working under sort of education and public engagement, doing community partnership work, connecting, in the community, doing programming around exhibitions. And then the other piece of my job was building out our equity team, which is an internal, it's staff, from across the museum that are thinking about, like, what does it look like for racial equity to be centered within all of our jobs, regardless of what our positions are. And so really looking at culture shift and what that actually looks like and how that can be possible within an institution and within a field that does have that kind of a history, right? And gosh, that we're not going to be able to undo that in a day or a year. I mean, that is literally a lifetime commitment for sure for all of us. And I do feel like there is that recognition at SAM that is the journey. We've, for me, the way in which I do this work and lead this work is around like the small steps to big change. And, I think we've been able to like do, a lot of different things with the equity team and with lots of different initiatives. And this is actually a moment for us to be doing some good assessment work of like what has been working, what's been effective, what's been authentic, and what still needs attention. These goals and these values are reflected in our, in our mission, in our strategic plan, all of that stuff. But it's like, okay, what does that actually look like in like real life on an everyday basis in every department, And so taking some time to really look at that and reflect on what has happened is really instrumental on sort of allowing us to see where we need to go and where we need to continue to put our efforts. In my new role, I'm really excited because I'm getting to work closely with leadership across the institution. So looking at, what are their needs? Every department is different. What does that culture look like? What does the work even look like within a capacity, whether it's communications and marketing, whether it's conservation, those needs are going to be really different. And so recognizing that it's not just this template or prescribed like way of doing things, but that we need to sort of assess even individually as leaders and managers who, are managing people in this time. What does that look like? And who do we want to show up as for that? How are we centering courage, vulnerability, the ability to recognize that you're going to stumble, that you're going to be wrong, that, taking those risks anyway is so key to fostering these sorts of environments in our culture, whether it's a museum or otherwise. And so we have to be real about the individual work that needs to be done and not just like the transactional or we want to increase diversity in the staff or, the board or the audience, whatever. But it's like, what kind of environment and foundation are we building from the get to allow for those things to happen as sort of an outcome, an output of this work that we're doing?
I mean, I really want to double click on what you just said, because for those on the call, there were so many aha moments that could have been taken there, because we hear a lot that what has happened in the past is there's something in the news, there's a huge reaction, and companies go, okay, we're going to appoint a person to lead our DEI efforts. We choose the closest BIPOC individual that we can find, and we did it. We're done, right? I think you're sort of naming them as though they are just expected, but can you go into what does it mean to allocate a budget? What does it mean to weave the DEI into the strategy for the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? How do you get to that point?
Yeah. I appreciate you asking that. For me, having been there almost 5 years and doing this work in other capacities prior to coming to SAM, I think it's the recognition that it's all of our responsibilities. And so what does that look like within the lens that we're building? What does that equity lens look like literally in the job and the tasks that you're doing? What questions are you asking yourself in those ways that allow for, some of that to come to the surface? Do you truly understand your audience? How are you using language within that? Is it inclusive language? Who are you, showcasing on your images and visuals? And, what is that? And is that reflective of the actual, system or the organization that you're representing? Because so many times, we do get tagged as sort of the poster kids for efforts, right? And I think for me, what's been awesome is, something that even attracted me to SAM in the first place was the fact that they were creating, this was a new position for me coming in 5 years ago, that they were calling that out and creating space and a position and budget to invest in a position like this, recognizing that it was essential to what needs to be done. So that, and then, now evolving into this director level position, it really has been an evolution. It hasn't just been like all of a sudden now we're doing this. A lot of this work we've been building out for quite a while in order to now be at this place, and to now, even during, so much difficulty in the last 6 months with COVID and hits to, arts and cultural institutions. We were definitely not exempt from that. And we've, it's been tough, but to also continue to prioritize this as a necessary, driver of this work. But that it's very clear that I am not the person doing the work. I'm the convener, I'm the connector, I'm sort of the communicator of lots of different initiatives that are happening throughout the museum that lots of different folks are doing. And how am I making sure that we're, connecting all of those together, sharing resources, building out the network and support in all those different areas so that we can collectively move this work forward together, and not just for this moment, but for the long run, because that's really the important thing, is like the foundation and being able to build that out long after I'm gone, long after all of us aren't in our positions anymore, but making sure that this is sustainable long term, and that it's a priority, and that it's being called out every day, but also in those formal processes that document that. And so that's sort of, the way in which I'm excited that we're approaching the work, and the fact that, I'm not being labeled as like the diversity police, or, that kind of thing. Like, oh, she's in the meeting, but it's like the fact that folks are coming to me, and being like, hey, how can I center this work within our department specifically, and I think our equity team, being the fact that it represents most of the departments at the museum, has been so impactful, and being able to kind of plant those seeds in each department. And now we're seeing them grow, and we're seeing them at the leadership level, and being able to like really take it to the next level of the work that's really needed.
Wow. I'm seeing Robin and Gunnar, and we're all shaking our heads vigorously. We're like, preach it, sister. I think one of the things that, and Robin Gunnar jumped in here too, when you named the prioritization, because, at LTHC Global, we're really looking and talking a lot about right now what we're seeing with leaders in terms of their own psychological fatigue that's happening right now. These leaders are dealing with the impacts of COVID, their home life, trying to sustain their company through this moment, the social upheaval, the upcoming election, all of it is mounting up. And we're seeing that their DEI initiative is now starting to lose a little bit of energy, which, history will show us this is a common pattern. We do this pattern again and again and again. We get motivated, but we as an animal tend to retreat back to what we know and what feels safe when we are in fight, flight, or freeze. Robin Gunnar, Priya, how do you continue to prioritize it when your most innate instinct is to go back to the safety of what you know?
I wouldn't call it safety. I think it's comfort, at least from a white ally perspective. I will say one of the things that attracted me to King County was the centering of DEI work, equity and social justice work, and while no, there is no perfect. And I always say perfect is also the enemy of good. You have to just keep moving forward. And in this moment, I have seen, at least at the county level, another kind of like, we need to double down, and in a way that is also taking into account COVID and funding and budgets and all of those things. And so, I think one thing that can be a comfort spot is, we're losing money, so we need to cut back on external or extra things like DEI work. And this is actually the time to actually increase that, because COVID, smoke, fires, all the things that have been happening to us are impacting the most vulnerable in our community, which oftentimes, because of our systems, are people of color, low-income folks, immigrants, the LGBTQ folks, who have experiencing those intersections. And so at this moment, we actually need to ramp that up, because this is also an opportunity. COVID has shown us, and I think, an opportunity to disrupt business as usual is one of the compacts here at Metro that our amazing DEI champion who was at Metro is now at the county, Anita Whitfield, often talks about. Disrupt business as usual and replace it with something better. And so that's how I'm trying to think about the work that I do and encouraging and many of my colleagues.
Absolutely. Yes. Can we get shirts that say disrupt business as usual? So I put that order in at the GSBA. Robin, what are your thoughts?
I got very wonderfully distracted by your words, Gunnar. Lindsay, remind me where you're going here.
Yes, thank you. So thinking about how is it that I continue to prioritize this work, even when, and to reuse Gunnar's words, when I'm going back to comfort, which is not necessarily safety.
Yeah. And white folks are trained to prioritize comfort and not saying the things. Like, we are socialized to prioritize, we don't say that, we don't talk about that. And therefore, when we feel uncomfortable, we go into fight or flight. And I don't think white folks are special. I think white supremacy culture teaches that and brings that out in us. So we've all learned to adapt that way. And so just recognizing when you're uncomfortable and sitting with it is like the first thing, as opposed to leaving or lashing out. And the first word that came in my head when you asked the question, the reason I asked you to ask it again, Lindsay, was I just heard community. Like, and I don't mean rely on other people to tell you what to do. I mean, who within yourself and within your loved ones can support you in the feelings you're having so that you can take action that is actually in support of liberation and freedom, as opposed to just feeling better. I think eventually that looks like a practice, that you do every day, no matter what. Just yesterday, responding to my coworkers, responding to the news in Kentucky, in our nation, I think so many of us didn't have a surprise reaction, and the surprise we were then responding to the people that were surprised, and they're just recognizing that these are patterns that we're all going to feel. And so I want to support the folks that are going through their feelings. I need to figure out what mine are and figure out how to take action that's for all of us. And for all of us, I think I'm repeating myself, but it doesn't mean like today I did these things. It's how can I sustain this action and be a part of the momentum that we're building.
Yeah.
Talk a lot. I'm going to stop now.
Yeah. Thank you for talking a lot. I think I, even in myself, want to name that desire sometimes to go like, I did the thing. I did it. I did it. Now it can be done. Now I can sit on the couch in my pajamas and eat popcorn.
I feel better.
Right. I feel better. I did one thing. Now I can have that glass of wine and that cheese, right? And the question is, how can I have the glass of wine and the cheese while sustaining the work? I want to ask if we could take a personal moment, Gunnar, Priya, and Robin, because one of the common questions that I hear from our community is, but how do I do it when I'm surrounded by people that do want us to reel it back, that are not really ready to make big changes, that are not really ready to disrupt the status quo? And, that can sometimes be even in your own household, right? Or a loving parent. How do you stay with it, Priya, when you're dealing with maybe a majority around you that's kind of saying, don't disrupt the boat too much?
This is, like I mentioned before, kind of like it's a lifelong commitment. This is not just about what we do, but it's about who we are and how we want to show up in community, in like civic engagement, and how do we want to be? Not like what do we want to be, but like who do we want to be? And I think that honestly comes down to like values. And when you are deciding to work at an organization, like, do those values align with your values? And what does that look like? And how is that being manifested within the organization? So I think that's one piece I think about in terms of like job wise. I think also it has to come from an authentic place, like, people can see right through, when I do in community partnership work, like when you're doing the check the box thing, or like, how you're approaching, like what sort of approach are you even taking? And are you meeting with folks or connecting with them for a specific reason? Is it, I hate that. And I think for me, like the way in which I do this work comes from my whole being. It's like comes from my collective like life experience. It comes from, growing up and going to like an all-white Christian school and being the only kid of color in my class, and like feeling the sense of like, I want to be in a space where I feel like I can just be exactly who I am, and, and have that matter and heard and recognized and celebrated, and that's like the core of the work. Like to this day, it's about that for me, and being able to be myself and foster spaces that also make other people feel that way too, that allow them to discover their own power, in their own way, on their own terms. It's not what I think they should be doing, but it's creating those spaces and holding space for other people to do their journey, and what they need to do around that. I think, and for me, that starts with, my family, my friends, my community, and the ways in which I've invested in that work over the last 40 years, because I'm from Seattle and have been doing this work in community for a really long time. So I bring that to everything that I do, those values of authenticity, collaboration and community, and what that looks like and how that's fostered. So regardless of like what position I am or which environment, those things I tend to lead with. Those are sort of my tenets, and how do I build those safe spaces for people? Especially now, like, people are coming to work, well, virtually a lot of times, but like with so much, and like it's impossible to, we're not in a space anymore where we can separate those, literally, physically, we're in our homes, right? And so what is it going to take to be an effective leader that can create and foster those kinds of spaces, psychological safety? That's something I'm really interested in, and what that looks like in order to be able to actually have that dialogue with each other, whether you're at work or whether you're at home. And to lead with those values, I think it takes courage. It definitely takes courage. And of course, like, this work gets labeled as challenging and difficult all the time. And of course it is, because structural and institutional racism has been for generations and generations. Like, it's not going away overnight. And it's not, we can't come at it with the check the box, I did the thing today. That's cool, great. Take your rest, do what you need to recover, and then what are you going to do tomorrow? I will be honest, like, this work for me, it comes from a different place than other positions or other kinds of work. Like, it's emotionally exhausting sometimes and taxing, and recognizing that, and then doing what I need to do in order to get the rest mentally, physically, all of that. So then boundary setting comes in too. Like, that's been important for me to like recognize this is what I need in order to be able to pick it back up tomorrow, and with everything going on, like, every day there's something new, every day there's something jarring, I mean, I can't fathom what that feels like for my Black brothers and sisters to every day. And then boom, come to work. Hey, function, exactly how, things have been, and recognizing that we're not working. It's not working, and we can't work in that way anymore. So how do I advocate to make sure that folks have what they need, especially right now?
I'm the emotion giggle crying. I'm giggle crying inside because, excuse me, yesterday my little one, my 6-year-old, came to me. I was wrapping up a meeting and she said, "Mommy, how are you?" And I said, "I'm tired." And she said, "I'll get you a sparkling water. I could hear you were teaching about racism." My 6-year-old gets it. She's like, you need something a little special, a little bubbly water.
Yeah.
Living and teaching about racism, Mom. I got you.
Sometimes a bubbly water, sometimes more.
So you go in the 6-year-old mind, she's like, this will get it. This will get it. Thunder, can you relate to what Priya is saying about that sustained commitment to one's values?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there is a need to figure out what strategies you're going to use. And for me, I was a longtime direct action activist. I was involved in the Occupy movement back in Boston. I've been involved in a lot of chain yourself to nuclear power plant gates kind of person. I literally did that when I was a teenager. And I've gotten to a different point in my life where, and part of it is also coming out here, back in Boston, I had a really tight activist, direct action activist community. And I just don't have that here. And so I'm not going to be the person out on the street downtown, but what can I do to support those people? Because I believe in what they're doing. And I also feel a little conflicted about that too, because that is my passion. And so I'm trying to figure out again where that is for me. But, I realize that it is, I did all this work in Massachusetts around trans rights, and it depleted me to the point where I was suicidal. And this is not actually, it's not a conversation that's talked a lot. We've had a number of, particularly F to M trans leaders, and particularly F to M trans men of color, who have passed away from suicide, who are my mentors, because of that isolation that you get when you are trying to undo all this and be a leader without the support. Our community, our trans community, is resilient and beautiful and amazing, and also broken in many ways too. And so you have, I've taken a lot of, as a visible leader, when I was a more visible leader, I took a lot of people's hurt towards me, and I was internalizing a lot of it. And I have to learn how not to do that, and recognize that we all are carrying some sort of trauma. And that I also am a firm believer in that as a leader, I also needed to step aside and make room for new leaders and do whatever I can to support that leadership. And the organization I helped to found on the East Coast hired its first Black trans man to lead it. And he is someone who I've been in community with for a long time. And my role is to answer his call whenever he needs it. And to, even though I've been gone 7 years, I still have relationships, and to be there and to listen, and to, because I know what he's going through in terms of that isolation, being a leader there. And so that is one of the strategies that I've moved to, is how do I be in the background and be a safety net when needed, and also relate to that stuff, because it is so isolating. And I want to make sure that my community members don't feel that way when they've stepped up to lead something, in particular, where the world is just not kind in so many ways. And that is kind of where I've moved to. And I may be back on the front lines, and I hope that I am at some point. And I think part of it is also my age. I just turned 50. And so the idea of building new friendships with people, like we uprooted our whole lives and moved out here. And so the Seattle freeze is real. It's very strange to me. So that's also just part of it, is I'm still trying to figure out where I fit into this Pacific Northwest culture, which is very different. I remember when I first moved here, I was looking at a map of Seattle, and I was in a meeting, and there was no conversation about how racially segregated the city is. Unlike in Boston, where that's that's a conversation. Have they done a lot of work on it? Not really, but at least it's on the table, and you can have that. Here, it wasn't even on the table. And that to me was just that's, as an outsider, seeing that. And so continuing to point those things out has been part of, using my Boston directness. I'm not Pacific Northwest nice.
Also from the Northeast, as you all can probably tell, and also lived in Boston. And note to all those traveling there, one future day, the Black people are on the Orange Line. Robin, can you share on this some final thoughts around living our values and how we move from allyship to sustained, active accomplice?
Layla Assad, PhD, in her book "Me and White Supremacy," talks about what's going to keep you going on your bad days. I can't quote her directly, but it's I'm motivated by my values and being a good ancestor. And so for future generations, what am I doing every day to think beyond myself and the people I know by working with people I know in relationships, so it's real and authentic and real. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that when I mess up? Because I was raised in a system that is intended for me not to support liberation. And it's not one thing. It's the relationships we're in and the groups we're in and the practices we have for ourselves and being aligned with recognizing when we make mistakes and knowing that that's okay and expected, and that no one else is responsible for me feeling good about my mistakes. Like all of that is my own eye work. And I have to be motivated by something bigger than myself, because all the systems are going to push me to perpetuate this thing. And I'm also from Seattle. I've lived here most of my life, bussed all across the city. And I want to say, Gunnar, I hear often about the Seattle freeze. Growing up here, this place was a very different place. Like I became who I am because I lived across the city and there was a lot of diversity. So for me, part of it has been acceptance that, now we're going to talk about segregation. Like now we're going to name those things because for me, like I've been talking to white folks in my life, my whole life about this because that's what happened. and so it's fascinating to me that people can't name it because we absolutely know, and we see it changing. And I'm still surprised. I had a person call me out for naming white supremacy culture at work 3 months ago on a diversity committee. Like, just everyone is at a different place in their journeys. How can I show up and support them to make progress? Knowing I'm not an expert, knowing I'm going to make mistakes and I'm imperfect. So I barely want to show up today because I'm going to get it wrong. But I have to because I'm committed, beyond my own experience, my own lifetime.
Yeah. Thank you. Gunnar, Priya, Robin, this is such an important conversation. I think it's important always, but especially right now as we're starting to see a little bit of a pullback, right? Our feeds have adjusted back to what are you eating? What are you wearing? And now is the opportunity to say in our homes, in our organizations, in our small business, in our huge enterprise, that we're going to keep our eye on the prize, right? And the prize being, in my humble opinion, that diversity becomes the norm, that it is normalized, and all of the potential, the possibility, the experience, right? I think about when I'm trying to live my values, that even on my most tired, run-down, pajama-wearing day, I still want to be educating my children. How do I raise anti-racist children who are able to call out misogyny? Even when my children are going, Mom, can we just watch the movie? I'm going, nope. We're going to name all of the things in this Disney movie right here. And they're like, that's the gummies, right? Even on your most tired day, you get to apply this in your home. You get to apply this on your person. And there's something about being able to look into a child's face and remind them constantly that diversity is the norm, like a garden. We don't look at the garden and say, I wish they were all daisies, right? We look out at a garden and we appreciate every flower for its unique contribution to the garden. That's what we're trying to get to here. I sound preachy, but some sermons are worth saying. Gunnar, Priya, Robin, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody listening at home or wherever you tuned in today, thank you for joining us. And we hope that you will remember that we are here to support you. As Gunnar said, you cannot do this work alone. Give us a call, reach out to the GSBA, and we'll remind you that you can stay in this work. All righty? We'll see you next time.